Hey friends, welcome back to another video. My name is Emma Lefebvre, and today we are doing a comparison video where we are comparing elementary or cheap watercolor supplies versus student grade versus professional. So let's jump right in and start. Okay, so today we are doing a comparison video of our cheapest of the cheap watercolor supplies versus our student grade supplies versus our professional supplies. So I'm going to be comparing paper and paint strictly. When it comes to brushes, unless you're comparing like a dollar store brush to a professional brush, I don't even know, are there professional brushes? You will see a difference. I don't feel the need to right now because I've found brushes that are very affordable, that are great quality, and then there's others that may be like super expensive that are not my jam. It's kind of an independent personal thing, brushes, but the brushes that I actually really like, if you like a snappier, stiff brush, I love my Craftamo bamboo brushes. I'm also working with them to create my own brushes. I will let you know when they're out. I don't know yet, but these are great stiff brushes. And then I also love Princeton snap brushes. They're also a great stiff and snappy brush. Those are my two snappy, stiff ones that I love. And then for a softer brush, Wonder Forest has wonderful brushes. I love her brushes, and they have these amazing tips. And then Princeton Heritage is also a really great and well-known softer brush as well. So these are kind of like my four brands that I love: Princeton, Wonder Forest, and Craftamo. But really work with whatever works for you. If all you can use right now is a dollar store brush, go for it. That's what I started with. Just keep in mind that with some cheaper brushes, the bristles may fall out. So like anything under, I don't know, $5 maybe a brush, but it may be not a long lasting brush. But I know the Princeton snap brushes, they are fairly inexpensive, and these are great quality, and I've had these forever. So those are my brush recommendations, but today we are comparing paint and paper, so let's get into it. For our paint comparison, for our cheap of the cheapest, cheapity cheap paints, I am going with my Artist Loft palette that I've had since the beginning. This is what I started out with. I think I might have had another Artist Loft palette where the pans were smaller, but there were more of them. But these were $7.99 at Michael's back in 2016 when I bought them, and they are meant for children, I'm sure. And they're fine to work with. There's lots of variety of colors, but they're definitely chalky, cheaper paints that are great if you want to start with, but these are our beginner option. For my student grade option, I have my old COTMAN watercolor pan. I don't know if you guys recognize this actual palette from back in the day. This was my palette from my first like 2 years of videos before I switched to my professional palette. This was my baby. I haven't opened this thing in years, and there's still so much paint in here. The only professional one in here, I believe, is this Opera Rose one, and everything else is COTMAN. So COTMAN is a great brand by Winsor & Newton, and I started off with these after I purchased those. Once I got into taking a watercolor workshop, I was given a few of these tubes, and I bought my own palette and then just built up my collection, and I love them. But however, they are student grade, so we're going to talk about the difference between the student grade Winsor & Newton versus the professional. But those are our student grade option. And then for our professional, this is my holy grail of palettes right now. This is like my go-to, and they're Winsor & Newton professional watercolors. So those are the three paints we're going to be comparing today. And then for paper, I didn't really know where to go with this exactly because I don't know if there's like a student grade paper or if it's just like student grade and professional. But for this, I decided to go with Artist Loft, which is like, again, the most inexpensive, and it's quite cheap paper. It is 90 pounds, so 185 GSM, which is not great. That means that the weight of the paper is fairly thin, and with watercolor or any kind of watertight medium, you want to have a fairly thick paper so it can withstand all that water. So this is not a great option, but this is the actual paper that I started with, this exact pad. I didn't use it for very long because I realized it wasn't great. But this is going to be our kind of elementary, inexpensive option for beginners. And then for student grade, I didn't really know where to go with this. For professional grade, I would say any 100% cotton paper would be like professional paper. And I did a paper comparison a little while ago, and I really loved the Paul Rubens 100% cotton watercolor paper. It is right up there with a bunch of others like Arches. So any kind of 100% cotton paper, cold press that you can find. I haven't really had one that I don't really like, but Paul Rubens is a great option, and Arches is always my go-to, but I'm currently running low, so I didn't want to use it for this video, but this was the next best thing. So we're going to be using for our professional, our 100% cotton by Paul Rubens. And then for the student grade, I don't know if you consider the student grade, but the Paul Rubens 50% cotton. So I kind of went in the middle here. And this one is 50% cotton paper. It performs really well, but it's not 100%. So I didn't know if this would be technically considered student grade paper, but I feel like it was kind of in the middle there. So that's what I'm going to be using. Both Paul Rubens blocks, these are blocks, are 140 pounds, 300 GSM. And like I said, they're blocks, which means they're all glued down on the sides. Not everything is like that. Not all paper pads. Some are glued down blocks. Some are actual pads where the papers are loose. If they are glued down like this, you can take a little palette knife, or I have this little tool, and you put it in there, and then you just kind of slice the edges. It just keeps it nice and flat and straight and whatever. But yeah, those are the materials we are going to be playing around with today and comparing. So let's just get into it. Okay, so the first materials that we are going to be looking at are our nice, our nice cheap watercolor materials. Both brand are Artist Loft. You know what? This is what I started off with, guys. And this is what we're going to use today. So, like I said, it is fairly thin. I'm going to start off just by swatching some colors, just so we can kind of get a feel for what they look like. Just some random colors, not all of them. Red, turquoise, my yellow's pretty funky looking, but that's okay, and then blue. Okay, so let's activate these guys. And like I said, these are kind of meant for kids. Oh, that's a lot more pigmented than I remember. But they're great for beginners. There's a reason why I have this. This is what I started out with, right? For months before I took a watercolor workshop and was given the COTMAN brand, the student grade ones. And, you know, these worked perfectly fine for months and months, like I said. So the downside of using these is that if you are planning on framing your artwork in your house and you want it to last a long time, these are not light fast, which means that when they are exposed to lots of light over time, they will fade. Also, the texture of these paints, when they are dried, they are quite chalky looking, which means that like you could even like rub your finger over the top. Oh, I'm not even showing you these swatches. Way to go. You could run your finger over the top and it will come right off. Also, any kind of layering with these, so say you want to let it dry and then do another layer over top, it might activate the paint underneath and just kind of rub away. So it's not ideal, but can you create something beautiful with these paints? Oh, 100%. You can create something beautiful with anything. I painted with spices and tea not too long ago and it worked. Is it going to last long in the light? No. But was it fun to do? Heck yes. Was I able to create something? For sure. So really use whatever works for you. This is a very cheap option, and honestly, I do recommend it for beginners. If you are wondering if you would like to dabble in watercolor, if it's something you don't even know if you're going to like, spend the least amount of money that you can and just give it a try. I feel like I haven't painted with these in a long time, and I feel like they don't look half bad. So let's paint a quick floral with these just for fun, and so we can compare. So let's do my typical pink flowers. These do look better new. My son uses these currently. and he loves to mix colors in the palettes, in the little paint wells. So that's why they kind of look a little beat, but that's okay. But yeah, so we're just gonna, I also did, I don't know if you guys all caught it, but I did a video recently of me recreating an old painting with this palette, of how I would do it now. And it actually, if you're wondering, like, can you create something beautiful with these paints? You definitely can. So check that video out. I can link it below as well. You don't need the best of the best to just create and be creative. If you are following one of my tutorials, I will say that it can get a little difficult to follow a tutorial that is meant for not higher quality materials, but if I'm doing layering or I'm talking about color bleeds or wet on wet, you might not get the same, actually you will not get the same effects that you will with better quality materials. It's not gonna happen, but you can still try your best and follow. Just don't get down on yourself and think it's you, because it's definitely not you. I mean, it might be you, but because you're a beginner, and at the beginning it was me too. But it is more than likely your materials. Like, look at this. I'm actually kind of loving this. I don't know, the color combination, this little turquoisey green and purple color combination, I'm kind of digging. So don't get down on yourself if it's not working out exactly how you want it to. It's probably your materials too, okay? And like I said, your lack of knowledge and experience with painting, because this stuff takes work. I'm sorry if you can hear the construction outside. I'm really hoping they're going to be done soon, but I don't know about that. But some other benefits. Let's talk about other benefits to this palette. There are tons of colors. Colors. And it's very cheap. So if you just want to get creative and get started, that's a definite benefit. So you can just, spend only a little bit of money and just grab some paints and just play. And really, that's where it all comes from. Like, even though my paint quality and my paper was bad at the beginning, I still fell in love with it. Like, I wasn't creating the most beautiful artwork, but I still got a feel of what watercolor was like and what I could create with it. And I fell in love. So you could definitely get something out of this. So don't give up. Don't give up or feel like you need to spend a fortune, because I remember being broke when I first started. I, didn't make a lot of money, and I needed to spend the least amount of money on supplies, and this is what I got, and it served me well until I was able to save up or ask for things for my birthday or whatever. So that is that. Okay, so this is my little painting for our cheapest of the cheap supplies. I was using my Princeton snap brush. These brushes, like I said, if they're in your region, are fairly inexpensive. I think they might be the most inexpensive, depending on if you get it. Like, these can come in a set, but I've never purchased them in a set. I've always purchased them individually. And I think they might be under $10 depending where you are. These ones I think are a bit more. So I think, don't quote me, but I think these are the most inexpensive, but they're really great brushes. So honestly, whatever you have access to, get. But let's take a look up close at this. Okay, so as it's drying, you can see kind of like these little cracking marks. That's like the chalkiness of the paint kind of separating a little bit. And then once it's dry, if you rub it, it comes off on your finger. So those are downsides. You don't get the same kind of color bleeds that you would with other materials. But I mean, overall, you can still create something beautiful and, enjoy it. So those are our cheap materials. Let's take a look at our student grade. Okay, so here is our student grade pad and our student grade palette. These are COTMAN paints. And if you are curious as to what they look like in tubes, these are the tubes. I have really big ones because I was planning on teaching workshops in 2020, which is a laugh because then, pandemic. But I started off with this size tube. They are 8 milliliter tubes. I think I started off with 5 colors that I got at the workshop, and they were like primary colors, and I would put them in a palette. I had a little plastic palette at the time, didn't have this yet, and let them dry and use them that way. Then I eventually built up my collection to this and whatever's in here. And again, I just let them dry, and you just reactivate them by adding water. So let's start by adding some water to some of these so we can play. I will list my 5, actually probably my top 10 colors for the COTMAN brand of what I suggest you go with. But these are some of my favorite paints, and I feel very nostalgic with this palette right now because I haven't used it in so long, and it did so much for me. Okay, so student grade. What classifies these as student grade? Basically, the difference between the student grade and the professional are that these don't have as much of a light, they don't have as good of a light fast rating. Is that what I mean? I think so. Which means that exposed to sun over time, they will fade way before the professionals will. There might be extra binder as well in the paints. So watercolor paints are made with pigment and binder and other stuff. So there might actually be more binder or filler in the student grade paints, which makes them cheaper because you're not getting as much pure pigment as you are in the professionals. I hope I explained that right. I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding of it. There's more filler in these ones rather than the professionals, so you're getting more of a pure pigment in the professionals. And that's it. Also, what I have noticed with the COTMAN brand, they are not as fast to activate as the professionals, which means like if I'm gonna wet them, watch them prove me wrong. You know, I just did a couple swipes there and then did it, and it's pretty light in color. Let me just for fun do a couple swipes of the professional. It's a little bit darker, okay? It activates a little bit faster, so just ignore that one, but that's professional, that's COTMAN. I think I have done a video on professional versus COTMAN Winsor Newton before. I'll try to find that and link it below as well. But yeah, so it takes a couple more swipes to activate. That's why I added water on top to kind of let it soak in and activate a bit more before I start swatching to make it as vibrant as possible. So I'm gonna swatch, and I will also talk about why I use them dry out of the palette instead of fresh out of the tube. You think two paints, they're meant to be used right out of the tube, right? Like that's the point, or otherwise you'd use pans. Well, I mean, the reason for me using tubes is 1, I feel like you get more. 2, I feel like for me, they're easier to find in tubes. So when I need a refill in my palette, they're easier to find rather than the pans if I were to get a pan set. And 3, I can customize my own palette, right? I like certain colors, and when I was trying to find COTMAN pan palettes back in the day, I think they have a better selection now. A lot of their palettes didn't have a pink. Their cadmium red was very orange, and I'd like a deeper red, so I like cadmium red deep. It's just you couldn't choose the colors that you wanted in your palette. So that's why I went with tubes, and I liked using tubes a lot better. So that is why I did that. And the reason why I don't use them fresh out of the tube is because I find you tend to use more paint fresh out of the tube than you do when they're dry. Especially that is true for beginners, because when you've never painted with watercolor before, you kind of get the feeling like you're supposed to use it like acrylic, like you just squeeze a bunch out and use all that paint, which is totally natural. But you really want to add as much water as you can, and you tend to use less when you are working with dried watercolors. So if you can find a pan set with all the colors that you like, definitely do that. I also liked using the tubes because I could purchase 5 and I didn't have to spend a lot of money for a bunch of colors I didn't want. And then also only purchasing 5 or 10 really helped me with my color mixing. So I didn't have all the colors available in my palette, so I would mix the colors I needed. And that's a really great skill to have and develop. Oh, I need blue. And I just think it's really beneficial to do that. So that is why I got tubes over pans for Winsor & Newton. But as time has gone on, I'm sorry I'm rambling, I have found some really great pan sets by other brands like Paul Newman. Why am I saying Paul Newman? By Paul Rubens. The Muñoz palette's really good. Etcher has a good palette. There's so many options now, and I've been able, Beam has great paints. So many great palettes now. So while I've always loved Winsor & Newton, I will admit now that there are other wonderful paints out there, but I tend to use these because this is the collection I've built up. Anyway, done with the swatching. Let's paint. All right. I probably could have started painting while I was swatching or talking. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. Okay. So let's take a look at the difference between our cheap paints versus our student grade. Now, you are going to notice a huge difference, especially when they're dry. And you'll also notice that they bleed so much better. If you don't know what a color bleed is, watch a bunch of my other videos, but this is kind of like a color bleed when you add like darker pigment or a different color, and it kind of like moves around and you get this nice seamless blend. Watch how I do that with a different color. Watch. Okay, so there's the peach right next to the pink, and it just has this seamless blend. And the paper is a huge difference too. Even this is even partially cotton paper. I don't know if I would consider this student grade paper. I don't know. I feel like maybe the Artist Loft or Canson XL might be student grade, but I wanted to give us a bit of a shot here. The fact that this was 50% cotton was pretty impressive, and it works so nicely. Canson XL is another paper I used to use, so like I said, I don't know if I consider it student grade or like the cheapest of the cheap, but either way, it's what I started with outside of the Artist Loft, and it's not great. If you can find paper for yourself with cotton in it, but if you, like I said, even with a cheap palette, if you're just starting out, you don't know if you like watercolor yet, do whatever works for you. Get the Artist Loft, get the Canson XL, get whatever you like and can afford or whatever. But paper is huge. So you'll see once I compare this one to the cheap one, you'll see the difference in the color bleeds. Okay, let's try and make that kind of same leafy color. It's a bit more bluey. What color is this? That's the dioxazine purple. What was I doing? All right, it's okay. Actually, the blue leaves look nice. Okay, see these bleeds? I love those bleeds. Okay, so let me just talk quickly about what I'm noticing, because I haven't painted with my COTMAN paints in ages. Like this specific palette, like it's bringing back memories. But after working with my professionals for so long now, I am noticing these are harder to activate. Not harder, they just take a little bit longer, which I'm not used to anymore, which is super weird. So that's something that's different about the professionals and the student grade. They take longer to activate. It's so weird. Paper I'm really impressed with. Paint is still really vibrant. Also, you'll notice that your paint is a lot more vibrant on better quality paper. Once I show you the other paper, you're gonna be like, what? That's crazy pants. Sorry if I'm a little weird today. I don't know what's up with me. Okay, let's look at this compared to our cheapy paints. Look at this. Do you see that difference? This is so much darker and more vibrant. And then, like I said, so see those color bleeds? They're not even dry yet, but like that green into the pink, it just bleeds so nicely. This, you don't really get that. They dry so fast. That's another thing with really cheap paper. it dries too fast, so you can't get those color bleeds. Even if I paint with, let's paint with these paints on this paper, okay? The paper or the water and the paint stays on top. It does not sit or does not soak in like it does on the 100% cotton paper. Do you see the difference there? It's not as vibrant and it sits on top, which means it's gonna dry at different rates and then it just looks kind of wonky, okay? I feel like the cheaper paints work better on this paper just because they complement each other, but this is no good, no good. But yeah, that is quite a difference in my opinion. So overall, my view on student grade COTMAN paints, I love them. And price point, they are way cheaper than the professionals. They are like half the price for a tube, and the professional tubes are even smaller too. So if you are looking to upgrade from really cheap supplies to something that's not too much more expensive, that works really, really well, I love, love, love the COTMAN from Winsor & Newton. They're not as good as the professionals, but it depends on what you're using it for. If you are starting to, open an Etsy shop where you're selling original paintings, and you want them to last long for your customers, you might need to upgrade to professional materials. But if you are even just, painting to scan your work and sell prints, these will work perfectly fine, like more than perfectly fine. So I highly suggest these for the next level up from the cheap, and you won't be wasting your money. So that's that. Now let's get to the professional materials. Okay, so we have our Paul Rubens 100% cotton paper. I don't know if we're going to see a difference with this. And it's quite similar to Arches. And if you guys know me, you know that I love Arches watercolor paper. So let's start off by swatching. I'm going to swatch the same colors that I did with the COTMAN. Yeah, like it takes no effort to activate these colors, which is interesting. I'm going to add just a little bit of water just to help just a little bit, but you'll see the difference. I'm trying to think. Actually, no, the only COTMAN, I do have one COTMAN color in this palette, and that's the mauve, because I didn't like the professional mauve because it's actually granulated, and I don't typically like granulated paints, so I'm not going to swatch the mauve, but that's the purple I swatched in the other one. Okay. So, professionals. You're wondering if it's worth spending all that money on a professional palette. So, like I was mentioning, it depends on what you're using it for. I was planning on selling artwork. Actually, no, I'm lying. Okay, so how I got my hands on professional paints in the first place. One of you darling people who watch my videos, had a bunch of Winsor & Newton tubes, professional tubes, that she was not going to use anymore. She found another brand she liked better. And she was like, she reached out to me and was like, hey, I have all of these professional tubes that I'm not going to use. Can I send them to you? And I was like, are you serious? That's crazy. Like, I was still using my COTMAN. I think I was like 2 years into YouTube. And she's like, I love your work. I'd love to send you some of the Winsor & Newton professional paints. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. So I said yes, and she sent them to me, and I was like, wow. She sent me a lot of colors too. A lot of the colors in this palette were from her. And then another person was like, I have Winsor & Newton professional tubes. Can I send them to you as well? Like, both of them had been used a bit, but they were still mostly full. A lot of them were full, which was incredible. So I was jumping at the chance. And so they gave me some tubes, and then I added a couple more colors that I wanted in my palette, and voila, I have a professional palette of Winsor & Newton professionals colors, and that's how it started. So that's the only reason why I upgraded originally, because people were like, you should try these, they're really, really good, I love your work, blah, 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 you should just do it. And I was like, no, money, so expensive. But then when someone gave them to me, I was like, okay, let's upgrade this. And so I just had to buy a couple more colors, and that's how I got my professional palette. And, I don't regret it, because, this has become my career. I've been so fortunate that creating YouTube videos has become my line of work. So now investing in my line of work with new supplies, I can justify now. I was a bit newer at YouTube when I got these, and I was kind of iffy about spending all that money. But now that this is like my full-time kind of job, it's definitely worth it. Are you guys seeing how vibrant this is? And I'll just tell you now, it was so easy to activate those colors, like so much easier. I think that's one of the biggest difference about the professionals and the COTMAN is like how easy they are to, oh my goodness, the word's gone from my brain. Activate, not react, activate. They're very easy to activate, and I love them for that. And then the other benefit to these is that they will last longer in the sun. I'm actually in the middle of conducting a light fast test, and by that I mean I swatched a bunch of my paints and I have been exposing them to the sun since the end of June, and I plan to go for months and months and months to see if any of them will fade in the sun. So I will let you know exactly when I know how light fast each brand that I have is. But that is the main difference between the COTMAN and the professional. Oops. In case you're wondering, and how fast they activate. Add a little bit of blue in there. They're just so rich in color. It's crazy. But I remember, I hope you guys don't mind me rambling while I'm doing this, but I'm just gonna keep talking. I remember when Jenna Rainey was selling watercolor kits of her favorite paints and brushes and all that stuff. That's how I got those Princeton Heritage brushes. She had professional paints in her kits. And I remember I was still quite a beginner and I was using the COTMAN and I didn't actually notice the difference. I remember using the professionals and going, they're not that great. I just couldn't tell. I think I wasn't as experienced then. So I was really unable to tell the difference. Now that I've had a lot more experience with paint and stuff like that, I can definitely tell the difference. They're a bit more vibrant, they're easier to activate, and then the light fast rating is kind of like what I go off of. But if you're still a beginner, if you feel like, is it worth it to get higher quality paints like professionals over COTMAN? I don't think so. Guys, save your money and build it up. And then once you feel like you're really ready and you know, can treat yourself or whatever, then do it. But don't ever feel like that's what's gonna make you a better painter, that if you get the best materials, you're gonna be the best. This takes years of practice, years of practice. You have to practice your skill because, like I said, you can have the most expensive materials, but if you haven't been practicing, you're not going to get the results you want. It does help a little, but it's not going to turn you into a professional painter right away. So if you love it, keep going and you will get there. All right, so there we go. Let's take a look side by side at the COTMAN versus the professional and see if you can tell the difference. The colors are a bit different, but really, if you put these both in front of me and said which is which, I don't know if I could honestly tell you. I don't know if it's also because these are wet. These are a little bit more vibrant, I feel like. The professionals are a bit more vibrant, but only by the slightest bit, and to the untrained eye, I don't think you'd actually be able to tell. Paper wise, okay, I feel like maybe I should have tested out a different bit of paper. They both were amazing. So I don't even know if I'd classify this 50% cotton paper as student grade because it is wonderful. It worked just as well. If you can see the difference, there's a difference in texture in the paper. This 50% cotton here on the left is more textured looking, but they both react the same. So now I'm kind of wondering if I should have used Canson XL for the student grade paper. Okay, I feel like I have one piece of Canson XL watercolor paper that might be considered student grade. Let's try that really quickly with the COTMAN just to see the difference. I'm gonna speed this up so you don't have to sit through the whole thing, but let's just test it out to see the difference. Okay, now let's look at the difference between the student grade Canson XL paper versus what I thought I would consider a student grade Paul Rubens 50% cotton paper. Okay. Okay, so now let's look at the difference between these. I don't even know if I would call this Paul Rubens student grade paper because it's so good, even though it's 50% cotton. Canson XL, see, I don't want to classify it either as student grade. I don't know. Student grade I feel like would be in the middle, and I feel like this is really good and this is not. So I started off with Canson XL. I'm not a big fan. As you can see, it pools in a lot of areas. So Canson XL is a cold press paper, same as this one, but it doesn't have a lot of texture. So when you paint, the water and pigment sit on top rather than soak into the painting, which one makes it really hard for it to dry evenly, so which is why you get these kind of funky marks where there's like little puddles of water and pigment, and then other parts dry a lot slower, so that's why you get these. You can still see some of these are really wet, and I use the same amount of water. And two, because the water and the pigment does not soak into the paper, it just sits on top, you're gonna get far less vibrant colors. So you can see they are the same paints, but this is far more vibrant than this is. It's crazy. So this is also kind of a PSA that spend money on paper, not on the paint. You can go with student grade paints and use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 colors and be able to create beautiful masterpieces. But it's really worth it to get better paper. So if you can find 100% cotton or the 50% cotton by Paul Rubens, Arches, Canson Heritage, there's tons out there. Like I said, I'll link the video of my 100% cotton paper comparison video thing. But yeah, that is the difference. So while I love these paints and they are great quality for student grade, they don't perform well, as any paint won't perform well on really cheap paper. So I don't suggest getting cheap paper if you're gonna start. Sorry, scratch that. I do suggest getting cheap paper if you want to practice strokes. If you're learning how to practice, you know, your leaf strokes, and you just want to do practice pages over and over again, definitely get cheaper paper. Just know you're going to get some pooling and it's not going to look right. But for the actual muscle memory practice, it's perfectly fine. This is what I started off with. Sometimes I'll even practice on it. But when you're actually doing a painting, you're not going to want this. You are going to want something better. And that is my final thought about all these comparisons. If you guys have any questions at all about paint or paper, what's worth it to buy, what's not, let me know in the comments below. Also, follow me on Instagram and you can always DM me there if you have any specific questions. But that is about it. That is my comparison, and I hope it was clear and you guys got a lot out of it. It was fun to do. It was fun to play around with my COTMAN palette again. It was very nostalgic for me, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you all so much for watching my video. I really hope you liked it and I hope you learned something. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and follow me on Instagram for even more. Have a great day, guys. Bye.